Okay, we're good. All right, well, sorry for the technical difficulties, everyone. Good morning. Lisa Broderson from the College of Nursing at Allen College. I teach in the MSN program, Masters of Science in Nursing program, and I also teach in the Doctor of Nursing Practice program. And I've been doing this academic paper writing presentation for a couple of years now, I think, for the occupational therapy program. I am going to record this session, so it will be available for later viewing. And I also wanted to make it available for my students. So that was one reason for doing it via Teams or Collaborate. I'm just a second, I'm having trouble with my controls here. Okay. All right, so looks like we have a lot of objectives here. Basically, I'm going to go through basics of structuring an academic paper, how to set it up so it's formatted correctly with the margins and line spacing, and we'll also go over some issues related to citing and making sure that you give credit where credit is due, and also a few issues related to avoiding plagiarism. So pages of objectives. They're very fine-grained objectives, so we can usually get through this, I think, in 2.5 to 3 hours with a couple of 10-minute breaks. And I will try to do breaks about every 45-50 minutes we'll take 10-minute breaks. Okay, so I am doing my best when I deliver this presentation to interpret the latest edition of the American Psychological Association's publication manual. And there was a new edition of that released last fall. And until that point in time, Allen College used the 6th edition, which had been in use for 10 years. And it was well overdue for revision. And I do think the revisions they made made the manual a lot better. It not only addresses use of APA editorial style for people who are writing manuscripts for journal submission, but it also now addresses APA editorial style for student papers. And that's been a big improvement in the APA manual. It's much easier to use and navigate to. Okay, so APA style is just one of many editorial styles that are available. And it was originally developed for writers of manuscripts who were submitting to American Psychological Association journals. So it's intended for use for writing manuscripts originally, but APA has, I think they were inundated with questions from students because there were a lot of aspects of APA editorial style that did not really pertain to student papers. And so they've come around and decided to accommodate the student audience for that reason. And it was also originally heavily focused on reports of empirical research, which you folks are going to kind of be writing because you're actually eventually going to be doing your capstone research project in teams, and you'll be writing a paper together that will have to conform to APA editorial style, in addition to the other papers that you're required to write in your program as you're a student here. So the 7th edition, as I mentioned, was released last fall, and it is much more accommodating to student papers. If you don't have it, I highly recommend getting the manual and not trying just to learn APA style based on presentations like this or other ancillary materials that are out there. Some of them are very good, but you can't, it's always best to go to the primary source, and you'll hear that over and over throughout this presentation. You want to get your information from primary sources. So these are some basic structural elements of an academic paper. You're going to have a document header, which is basically the top margin from the top edge of the paper to the 1-inch margin that you're going to be setting up. And there's a little bit of information you put in there, the running head, which student papers are not required to include, but your instructors may require that. So I talk about it for that reason. And then the page numbers. And then we'll talk about page order, again, page numbers, typeface, line spacing, margins, paragraph headings that you can use to organize the paper. Okay, so first thing is the running head, which was always a major problem for students because it was hard to get that in the document header and position it opposite the page number and then not have the words running head appear on the second page and the other pages of the paper, which is how the APA manual initially specified that you structure the header in a student paper. So it's not required for student papers unless it's specified. And I'm not sure what your professors in your program specify, but I'm guessing that they probably won't require you to have a running head. But anyway, if just in case you are, it's a shortened version of the paper title, and it's going to be like 2 to 4 major words of the title. It doesn't necessarily have to be those exact words, or the words don't have to be in the exact order either. It's less than 50 characters, characters meaning any letter, number, space in there. So it's not words, it's characters. So your full title could be used as the running head as long as it's less than 50 characters. And the running head's positioned flush left opposite the page number. One last thing about the running head is that you can't put abbreviations in it unless it's the word and. You can abbreviate the word and with an ampersand, so that would be okay. Okay, so then page order. Your papers are always going to start with the title page. It's always going to be page 1. If your professors require you to have an abstract, that will be page 2. And then the text would start on page 3. Now in the nursing program, most student papers are not required to have an abstract, and so the text of the paper starts on page 2. And the text, by text, I'm referring to the introduction of the paper, the body of the paper, and the conclusions. And after the text, you're going to have the references or a reference list. And if you're required to have footnotes, those will be following the reference list. Then you'll have tables, figures, and then lastly, appendices. Now, APA does allow you to incorporate tables, figures, and footnotes throughout the text. So you wouldn't necessarily have to put those at the end of the paper. And I'm thinking in most instances, you're not going to be required to use footnotes. You might, but tables and figures are a possibility. And so you'll have to check with your faculty to see if they want you to intersperse the tables and figures throughout the text in close approximation to where they're first mentioned in the text, or if they want you just to arrange them all at the end of the paper after the reference list. Now, appendices are always after the reference list. You don't, they're not appendices if they're incorporated throughout the paper. So an appendix by definition is something that's at the end. And it's possible you'll have appendices in your, very probably likely in your capstone project paper. Okay, so page numbers then have to be flush right, and that means they're aligned right, so they're positioned on the very right side of the document header. They're on the same line as the running head if a running head is included. And you shouldn't ever just type numbers to create page numbers. You need to use your word processor's page numbering tool. And you want to type the page numbers in the same font and font size as the rest of the paper. Often I'll get student papers where the default settings for the word processing program are, say, a font called Calibri, and then the student's typing the paper in Times New Roman. So you need to make sure you reformat your page numbers to be in the same font as the rest of the paper. And then, as I said before, the title page is always page 1. I'm just checking here to make sure we don't have questions, and we do not. Okay, so regarding typeface, another word for typeface is font. And APA style specifies different typefaces and fonts that you can use. It used to be they were very restrictive. They only wanted you using a serif font. A serif refers to the little points that come off the ends of the strokes of a letter. Okay, and then a sans serif font is a font that does not have those little strokes at the end of the letters and numbers. So, and the recommended serif fonts that APA provides are the 12 point, and I spelled point wrong there on the slide. That should be point, not pont. Times New Roman, and you can use also 11 point Georgia. And then there's a 10 point normal computer modern font that I'm not familiar with. But a new thing to APA style is that you can use sans serif fonts like Calibri, Arial, or Lucinda Sans Unicode. And I would say that probably most students, if they choose not to use a serif font, they'll use Calibri or Arial. And in those cases, you use 11 point because those fonts are a little bigger than, say, the 12 point Times New Roman. So they end up taking up about the same amount of space on the page. Those are your options then for typeface, font, and size. And one thing I didn't mention is that throughout this presentation, instead of putting full citations of the APA manual, I put just the section numbers. So what you're seeing on this page next to line spacing, that's the section symbol, and then the section number where you can look in the APA manual to verify or get more information about the information I'm providing. So regarding line spacing and margins, it's double spacing throughout. So always use double spacing. You should also pay attention to the space before and space after settings, and those should be set at 0 point. And when I do the demo for setting up an academic paper, I'll show you what I mean by that. You should have 2 double space lines between the title and the byline on the title page. So there's a little extra distance between those elements of the title page. And then there are exceptions made for tables, figures, footnotes, and equations. And I'm not going to get into those, but just keep that in mind that if you're including a table or figure, you may not have to use double spacing. You might be able to use smaller line spacing. Margins are generally set at 1 inch or 2.5 centimeters, and they should be the same on all sides of the page, unless your professor makes an exception, but they're going to tell you if they're going to make an exception. So you can assume that your margins should be set at 1 inch unless you're told otherwise. Okay, so then paragraphs. A paragraph should always be aligned flush left, not flush right or justified. And I'm going to show you more what I mean about that when I do the paper setup demo. And you should not insert paragraph returns at the end of lines, except if you're going to start a new paragraph. And maybe that doesn't mean anything to you folks because you're too young to remember a typewriter. But for those of us who used to write papers on a typewriter, at the end of each line, you hit a return so that you could start a new line. The typewriter wouldn't do that for you, whereas a word processing program knows when you're butting up against the right margin, and it knows to return and start another line. So you should not automatically insert a paragraph return just to start a new line, only to start a new paragraph. Okay, indenting should be a 1/2 inch, and you can use the tab key or the first line indent tool in the word processor program. You shouldn't use the space bar to create the indent, and by space bar I mean that you would type like say 5 spaces to indent the first line of a paragraph. And I'm not really sure why that's a problem. It's just best practice to use the tab or the indent tool. I will see like some older students my age, when they first start typing papers in graduate school, they'll tend to use the space bar to create distance between letters and to create that indent, but I always advise them not to do that. And then just regarding paragraphs in general, you should avoid a 1-sentence paragraph. And a paragraph should generally not be greater than 1 page. So you generally want a paragraph to be 3/4 page, not more than a full page. Okay, so headings are a good organizational strategy for papers that are relatively complex. And APA describes headings in sections 2.6 and 2.27. Headings follow the headings that you choose. There's 5 levels of headings in APA style, and they follow outlining conventions. So I'm going to make the assumption that you're familiar with how to create an outline and how you decide how many topics and subtopics to include. But you're supposed to follow outlining conventions when you use those levels of headings. Now, the introduction is not used as a heading. So it's like that first paragraph of your paper, or first 1 to 2 paragraphs. Everyone knows that's the introduction. Okay, so it's implied, and you don't type introduction as a heading. And headings may not even be necessary in short, simple papers. You have to use headings, you have to have at least 2 main topics that you're covering. Okay, if you just have 1 main topic, there's no need to use headings. And if that main topic has, well, if the main topic has subtopics, then there may be a reason to use some headings, but you'd still use first level headings. But I would check with your instructors if they want you to use headings. Oftentimes, the instructions for the paper you're writing will imply what those headings should be, because it has major sections that they want you to cover. So here's just an example of an outline. Now, this is not how you would actually do the headings, but it's kind of gives you the idea of the outline convention. Okay, so you'll notice that. Okay, so I've got the introductions, like the first main section of the paper, and I put it in brackets because you don't type the word introduction. All right, so it's invisible. But then once you come to your first main topic, okay, so you use a level 1 heading, and let's suppose that topic had 2 subtopics. So we've got subtopic A and subtopic B, and you would use level 2 headings in those situations. And then, of course, after those headings, you're going to type text. Now, the way I have this, I'm presenting this, subtopic A has 2 subtopics. So it's got 2 minor topics. So that's why I have the number 1 SS or S subtopic and the number 2 S subtopic. And then you would use level 3 headings in that case. And then you could even have even more finer grained topics, in which case, say this subtopic has some subtopics itself. In those cases, you would use level 4 headings. And you'll notice that I've got 2 of everything, at least 2. And that's because you cannot have 1 level of heading without requiring another section with that same level of heading. Okay, so you cannot have a Roman numeral 1 without also having a Roman numeral 2 or a second main topic. You can't have a subtopic A without having a subtopic B. If you have a subtopic 1, then you need to have a subtopic 2. And then if you have a subtopic A, you also would need a B. Okay, and so on down to the finest grain level, which I'm denoting with these lowercase letter I and II. Those would denote the level 5 subheadings in APA style. Okay, so in general, to warrant a heading, there must be at least 1 other heading of the same level. And the same goes for all the lower level headings, levels 4 on down to 1. Or I'm sorry, 1's the highest level of heading. 5 is the lowest level of heading. And then you'll notice that I also put the last section of the paper is the conclusion. And I bracketed the word conclusion because it's typically implied. However, to offset your conclusion, you often do have a heading that's called conclusion or conclusions. So even though I bracketed that last heading in the outline, that doesn't mean that you couldn't use conclusion as a heading. It's just that you might have another name for it too. It might be called summary or final points or summary points or something like that. It wouldn't necessarily have to be conclusion. Okay. Just check for questions. All right, so the first section of the paper is the title page. Okay, and it's covered in quite a few sections of the APA manual in chapter 2. And the very first thing on the title page is going to be the title of the paper. And it should be centered horizontally in the upper half of the page. And by upper half of the page, what I mean is if you took the page and you actually were holding a hard copy of a page and you folded it in half lengthwise from the top edge to the bottom edge, you would want the title to appear above that fold. And it should be typed in bold and in title case. And later on, I'll actually explain what I mean by title case in contrast to what I mean by sentence case, which is another word I'll be using in this presentation. Okay, the title should be precise and succinct. APA used to specify that title should be about 12 words, but that was a frequently violated rule. You often get and need long titles, but you should make it use as few words as possible to express, to capture the gist of the paper. Okay, so that's what I mean by precise. It means to precisely reflect what the paper is about, as well as doing so in as few words as possible. Okay, then after the title, you insert 2 double spaces or 4 single lines, and the author names would appear there. Now, in most of your papers you're going to write, you're going to be the only author, but I know for sure in your capstone paper, you're going to have multiple authors for that paper. But so in that case, you'd want to check section 2.5 for how you list those author names. There are also rules about the order of authorship. Usually first author has significance. It's someone who was a major player in writing the paper or the manuscript. And then the roles, the amount of contribution that the subsequent authors made to the paper is less depending on the order. So going from most contribution to least contribution. But I'm guessing for your capstone paper, it's going to be determined by alphabetical order, because that's also another way to arrange authors, assuming that everyone contributed equally to the paper. Okay, and then 1 double space or 2 single lines below the author names, you're going to have the affiliation. And for student papers, the affiliation is simply the college, although we used to just put Allen College, but in the new APA style guidelines, you're supposed to include the department as well as the program as well as the college name. So for you guys, it'd be something like occupational therapy program, comma, Allen College. Okay. Continuing with the title page, below the affiliation, you should list the course number and name. So that should be 1 double space or 2 single lines below the affiliation. So an example would be OT 528, Research 2, Design and Methodologies. Okay, and then you're not done yet with the title page, because below the course number and name, you need to put the professor's name, and it should be just 1 double space or 2 single lines below the course. Make sure you spell it correctly in the form that the professor prefers, and professors will usually tell you what they prefer. So for example, it could be Professor Bowen or Dr. Bowen, Dr. Steve Bowen. They usually put their first and their second name, and perhaps their middle initial. So I'd kind of check with your professors what they prefer. My name gets misspelled a lot. My last name, the last 3 letters are S-E-N, but it often gets spelled S-O-N. And it seems picky that you would want to require students to spell your name correctly, but I think it also reflects attention to detail, which is important in academic writing and in the profession that you're going into. So that's important to make sure that you Spell your professor's name correctly and address them in the way that they prefer to be addressed. Okay, and then finally, you put the assignment due date. Or I tell my students they can put the due date or the date that they actually submitted the paper. So that's an exception that I make. But when in doubt, put the assignment due date there. And I will tell you that, if you get an opportunity to revise a paper, make sure you change that date of the revision, because it looks sloppy when you have the same date appearing over and over on on drafts of a paper when it's clear that the paper was not written or finalized on that date. So make sure you're precise about your dates as well. And there's several ways you can present the date, which again is going to be a double space or 2 single lines below the professor name. So you can, the traditional way is September 8, year 2020, or you can do it with the day first followed by the month in 2020. And notice in that second example below format options, there's no punctuation in there, whereas there's a comma after the date or the day in the first example. You should avoid the second bullet under format options using just numbers for dates. And now that last example, the 220-09-08, that's permitted in countries that use International Standard Date. And I really can't tell you anything else about that, but in the US, the first bullet examples are the ones that you should follow. All right, so getting to the main paper structure. Every academic paper starts with an introduction, which again has no heading. Introduction is going to be typically 1 to 2 paragraphs, and it's going to prepare your readers for the topic or the problem that you're going to address in the paper. And it will also typically have your thesis or your purpose statement. And then the body is going to go into detail about whatever it is whatever your purpose is for writing this paper. The body's going to have 2 or more paragraphs. If it's a short paper, it might only have 2 to 3 1/2 to 3/4 page paragraphs. But the content in that body is supposed to support your thesis or achieve the purpose of the paper. And then you'll always end with a conclusion, which is going to be maybe just 1 paragraph, sometimes 2 paragraphs, but it's going to revisit the main points of the paper and bring that paper to a logical close. Okay. All right, so then the first page of the paper is, if it doesn't have an abstract, it's going to start on page 2. If it's an abstract, it'll start on page 3. And then you're going to type, and I put here, you should be typing the paper title on the first line of the page of the paper. It just says type paper on first line of first page, but I omitted the word title after that second bullet. So type that paper title on starting on the first line of the paper page. It should be centered and in title case and bold formatted. And then you hit a paragraph return and begin the first paragraph of your paper, which is going to be flush left and double spaced, 1 double space below that title. And again, don't use introduction as a heading. It's kind of like the title of the paper serves as the first level heading on the first page of the paper, but the paper title's generally excluded from the definition of headings and levels of headings. Okay, so what I want to do next is do a quick demo of setting up an academic paper. And if you've got your laptops with you, you could follow along and be doing the same thing. So I'm going to stop sharing this screen, and I'm going to stop my presentation a second here. And I'm going to just bring up a Word document. All right, you should be able to see the Word document now.
Yes.
Okay, cool. All right, so, and I'm going to have you guys prompt me if I forget, because I'm still making the transition from 6th edition to 7th edition APA style. And so I have to often look to see how I'm supposed to format a piece of the title page. So one of the first things that I do is I want to check the default settings for the document that I've got here. So I usually go to the Home tab and I go to the Paragraph tab. Okay, and I just kind of check the settings that I have here in the Paragraph tab. All right, so it doesn't have anything about my font yet, but I'm going to look at my indents. And if you wanted, you could set it so that every paragraph automatically indents by a 1/2 inch. So you could set this as having a first line indent for all paragraphs. But and that's a personal preference, I tend to just create that indent myself. One of the things I wanted to check here, though, is it used to be that Microsoft Word would default to 8 points or 10 points of space after. So right here under spacing where it says after, this would be set at 10 or 8 or whatever. And it didn't matter because it should be 0. And what that would do is it would create extra spacing between paragraphs. So instead of just that double space between paragraphs, you'd have a double space plus an extra 8 or 10 points of spacing. Okay, and you don't want that because it doesn't comply with APA editorial style. It has to be strictly double spaced. All right, so the line spacing is set at double here, which I'm going to leave. And then I want to check my tabs. So I'm going to open that up. It looks like the default tab stop is a 1/2 inch. So that's good. So I know when I hit the tab key that my paragraphs are going to automatically format with a 1/2 inch first line indent. So that's okay. And then I want to go back to that again. All right, so once you have these settings the way you want for this paper, you can set them as the default. All right, so and it'll ask you if you want to set it as the default for any other papers you do in Microsoft Word on your computer or this document only. And I'm just going to leave it at this document only. Okay, so that we've got that part taken care of. Okay, the next thing I want to look at is the font. Up here, if you put your cursor beside the paragraph return, and that's one thing I should mention too, is when I type papers, I always show the paragraph marks because that'll help you diagnose where paragraph returns are actually inserted, and it'll help you see where you've got extra spaces. It helps you to diagnose formatting issues with the paper. So I leave that on, and then it drives some of my colleagues crazy if I bring up a Word document and I have that on. So if you're just displaying a Word document for your classmates or your teachers and you're displaying it on screen, you might want to shut that off. So you just click on the show hide paragraph tool and it'll make it disappear. But for this demonstration, I'm going to keep it turned on so we can see the little paragraph symbol. Now that doesn't show up when you print the paper, so you don't need to worry about that. But okay, so what it's telling me is that I've got my document set formatted in Times New Roman 12-point font. Well, let's say I want to change that. Maybe I want to go with 11-point Calibri instead, because I can now, because APA lets me do that. So to change the font, I can change it here, and I can do Calibri here. And I think I'll go ahead and do that. And I think it said 11-point Calibri was what was recommended. And so suppose I want to make that the default for this paper. And here's another way you can change the font here and the font size. So right now it says I've got, for the font style, it's regular, and it's saying body there. I'm not sure why, but you can pick your, you could also pick your fonts out of this list here. Okay, so, and I'm going to find Calibri. There it is. And 11. So now down here in the preview, it's telling me what Calibri looks like. and I want it to be 11 point. And that's really all I want to change here for right now. So I'm going to set that as the default for this paper. So I clicked on set as default, and then I come up here and I'm just going to say yeah for this document only. Okay. So now I kind of have the font and the font style, the font size set up. I want to check my margins to make sure they're set at 1 inch all around. So to do that, there's multiple ways you can do these things, but here's one way you can check your margins. And you go up to layout and you look at margins, and it's telling me that I've got the margins set in the normal style, which is 1 inch all around. So top, bottom, left, right are all set at 1 inch. So that's good. And that is the default setting for Microsoft Word. So I'm not going to go in and set that as a default. I'm just going to trust that it's set that way. All right, so I kind of got that basic thing set up. The next thing I like to do is go into the document header. And one way you can do that is you can go up to insert and you can go over to header. And I can actually tell it, I can tell that I want it to set up the header with 3 different things that I would type in the header. I'm not going to do any of that. What you can also do is if you can go up to insert page number. Okay, and we know we want to put our page number at the top of the page, and we want it to be aligned right. So this is the example we can choose. And you'll notice it put the page number in there for me. Okay. Now, if we had to have a running head, then we could type that right now too. And one of the things we would do, because I guess never mind, I was falling back to old APA style anymore. It's not relevant anymore what I was going to tell you, but to type that running head, and I believe it has to be in all caps. And it's a shortened version of the title, so I'm just gonna. Okay, so once I type that, then I'm going to hit the tab key a couple times, and it'll position the running head flush left opposite the page number. Now, for most student papers, we don't need a running head, so I'm going to just go ahead and take that out. Wait a minute. First, I want to show you one thing. Oh, well, never mind. No, I'm falling back to old APA style, so disregard that. Okay, so I deleted that running head, and just because we don't need this extra line here, I'm going to delete that too. So all we've got then in our header is our page number. And by inserting the page number with the insert page number tool, it'll automatically paginate all the other pages. Okay. And like I said, there's multiple ways you can insert a page number. But one of the things you don't want to do is type the actual numbers on the pages. Now, in a little bit, once we have a second page of the paper, then I'll be able to show you how the page numbers automatically appear on the subsequent pages. But for now, I'm going to go back into my document. Right now, I'm up in the header, so I really can't do anything in the body of the document. So what I'm going to do is double click on the document, and that takes me back into the document now. So I'm out of the header. And one of the ways I can tell I'm not in the header anymore is because it kind of grayed out my page number. Okay, so at this point, we want to type the title of the paper. And from what I understand, you could type it right up here. And this is just a generic title. You would never have this type of title of your paper. But if we wanted, we could move it down a little bit. Okay, so let's just move it down. We want to center it. So I'm going to go back to the home key. And these are the alignment tools. And so this alignment tool is align left. And then we have the centering align tool, and that's the one I want here. So I'm going to hit that and move it over to the center. Then you have the align right centering tool, which would move it clear over there. And then you have the justified one, which I'm guess Justified makes it so a line of text butts up against both the left and the right margin. Whereas having your text of your paper aligned left like it's supposed to be, you'll end up with a ragged edge over here, and that's correct. So you don't want to use the justified feature. Now getting back to being on the title page, I do want this centered. Okay, so we've got title of paper, special assignment, and then the next thing we have is our author. Below that, the next thing I think is the affiliation. So I'm going to just make up a class. Well, I'm going to use the class name that I teach. Oh, wait, class name doesn't come in yet. So it's College of Nursing, or you could put, I could put Masters of Science in Nursing program if I want to be more specific. So maybe I'll do that. College. All right, and so then below that, our course name. See, I'm not a good typist. And I believe below that is the instructor's name. And I'm just going to say Dr. We'll just make it Albert Stein. And the assignment due date. What, if anything, am I forgetting?
We had one person mention the two double spaces.
Right.
After the title.
Okay. And the rest, those can all be just one double space. I think so. And then I think I want this bold. I think that'll do it. I think that's our paper. And the main thing then is that the title of paper is in the upper half of the paper. This stuff can spill on down into the lower half as long as our title's sitting in the upper half. Okay. All right, so next we want to get to the next page of our paper, and you'll see that we just have one page here. So hit a paragraph return, and what I'll see some students do is they'll just keep hitting paragraph returns till they get to another page. Then if you were to change anything on your title page, or if you were to move this down, it would mess up the first line of the second page of your paper. So I advise them not to do that, but instead to insert a page break. And to do that, you can go up to Layout, Breaks, and just simply insert a page break. And you'll be able to see that you did that because you'll see this little text right here, which if you don't have the paragraph marker on, you can't see that. All right, so at least until you get your paper typed, you want to make sure that you have that paragraph marker on. Another thing reason that I don't set my paragraphs to default at a 1/2 inch indent is because a lot of times what will happen is if you do that, this is another way to create a first line indent. Up here in the toolbar, you can just move this little triangle over there. And notice that it moved this line over a 1/2 inch. So if I were to type the title of my paper there, it's not truly centered. Okay, it's centered as well as being indented a 1/2 inch. Actually, I think it's flipped back, but okay. So, and that's noticeable. You can see it's shifted a bit to the right. So we want to get that back to just being centered. All right, so then the second line of our paper, it's already looks like formatted with the first line indent, but it should do the same thing. And you'll just, type a lot of words here till you get a paragraph. But I want to get that to indent, so I'm just going to hit the tab key. And so it automatically moved the first line indent over there. Something else you could do is you could type all your paragraphs without having them indented. Then you could select all the paragraphs, just highlight and select the paragraphs on all the pages of your paper. And then in one fell swoop, you can indent them all a 1/2 inch. And so that, what I just did there, had I selected the entire paper, it would have moved everything to a 1/2 inch indent. Okay, now let's just imagine we've got lots of lines of text. We've got many paragraphs in our paper here, and we get to the end of our paper. So we're on page 6 or 7 or whatever, and we're ready to do our reference page. Okay, so again, then instead of hitting multiple paragraph returns to create a new page, because the reference page has to start on a new page, we're going to insert a page break. So we go up to layout, breaks, and page break. All right, so then, and I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, but whoop. The references then starts on a new page, and it's headed by the word references, which should be centered, and I believe bold. Okay, so I'm going to stop there, and we're going to take a break for 10 minutes. So we'll resume at 11:20. But I want, at that point, we'll be talking about the reference list, and then I'll return to this demo, and we'll just go over briefly how you create the hanging indent and maybe look at a few reference styles. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording at this point, and I'll resume recording when we come back from break at 11:20.